Good evening. Thanks to our kids sing fill-in, I have a lot more time to speak tonight. Didn't realize how long Wendell made that. You can go ahead and turn to 1 Kings if you'd like. That's where we're going to begin tonight together. 1 Kings. This first slide is one of the most iconic scenes in history. It has to be, right? Where Aladdin accidentally rubs this lamp, and then out of the lamp comes this genie who gives Aladdin the opportunity to submit 3 wishes. And he says, no substitutions, no takebacks or exchanges. And he will fulfill those 3 wishes. One thing you might not know about me is my mom directed a drama group when I was growing up. So I was drafted to be in several plays. And one play, I think it was when I was in junior high maybe, I played the genie in Aladdin. And in case you were wondering, it was the worst rendition of the genie that has ever happened in the history of plays. But it was really fun in a way to mimic Robin Williams in trying to be the genie. But every time I read our text here in 1 Kings, I think about this scene in Aladdin. Because we're starting in 1 Kings chapter 3, which is when God comes to Solomon. And he gives him the opportunity to ask God for whatever he wants. Kind of like the genie in Aladdin. But Solomon's answer is a little bit different than Aladdin's. So I want us to read beginning in 1 Kings chapter 3, and we'll read verse 3 part of it here in just a second. But tonight, what we're talking about is wisdom for life's complexities. Wisdom for life's complexities. Now, I feel strange talking about this topic as a very young person. I feel strange talking about wisdom. I feel a little bit like Aladdin trying to explain how the genie just makes these wishes happen. But I've been fascinated lately with studying wisdom in the Bible, and I wanted to talk about it with you, and maybe something I say will also fascinate you and inspire you to dive deeper and to talk to people much wiser than I am. But in 1 Kings chapter 3, we find, growing up in Bible bowls and I don't know what else, but I just remember the question would pop up from time to time. Who is the wisest person who ever lived? The oldest person who ever lived, if you grew up in the Church of Christ, you probably know, Methuselah, 969 years, right? But one of the other questions, who's the wisest person who ever lived? Solomon. Easy answer. Next question, right? It's a gimme. But Solomon's origin story is here in 1 Kings 3. It's kind of like, how superheroes have an origin story where they became super and they became heroes. This is Solomon's origin story. And in verse 3, it tells us really the foundation of all of his heroics. It says, Solomon loved the Lord. Now, that's a big statement because there are not very many people of whom that is said in the Old Testament or the Bible as a whole, that they loved the Lord. I don't know if there are very many people in our world, in our churches, who could genuinely say that. Like, we're trying to get there, but to say that we genuinely love God, I think for a lot of us that's a bit of a climb to get there. But Solomon loved God. And that's a bit of the foundation for God's appearing to him and giving him his genie moment, as it were. And what Solomon says in verses, we'll read together verses 7 through 14. At the end of verse 7, he says, I am but a little child. Notice the humility in that. I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or how to come in. That's a Hebrew idiom talking about leading. So he's saying, I don't know how to lead. I'm not a leader. I don't know how to do this. And he continues and he asks God, give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this, your great people? It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this, and God said to him, because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding, to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all your days. And if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. So it's this really awesome scene where Solomon has a beautiful heart before God. And he asks him not for something selfish, self-serving, but for something to bless God's people. And so God blesses him with that, and as God does, he blesses him with so much more. And all of that stuff actually happens in Solomon's life, right? He lives a long life, and in that life, his wealth and his fame and his wisdom are unmatched. Solomon was truly a great man. He used this special gift of wisdom in a lot of ways. He used it wisely. Look at chapter 4 of 1 Kings. In verse 29, it says, God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure and breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt, for he was wiser than all other men. It concludes in verse 34 by saying, and people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. So everyone comes to Solomon just to hear what he has to say. Some of you may be the person in your friend group. You probably are this person for someone. Your friend group or family, they come to you and ask for life advice. And that's an honor, right? When someone comes to you and asks for what to do in this situation that really matters to them, that's an honor. Now, can you imagine being Solomon? He's this one guy who everyone on earth, the most important people on earth, they all come to Solomon and they ask him, hey, what would you do in this situation? What would you do in that situation? And actually, in between what we read, in between where we stopped and where we started, it notes that he also spoke 3,000 proverbs. So if you're wondering where the book of Proverbs came from, a lot of them came from that. So if you didn't know, the book of Proverbs is mentioned in the book of 1 Kings, interestingly to me enough. But anyway, everyone is coming to Solomon for his wisdom, right? For his mind. He was truly a great man. But Solomon would be the first to tell you, I think, that even though he was great, even though he was wise, he didn't always apply that wisdom to every area of his life. 1 Kings chapter 5, if you look at it, it tells us that Solomon ruled like the old Pharaoh of Egypt. If you remember, the old Pharaoh back in Exodus, he forced the Israelites into slavery. He forced them to make to work for him. And he put them under cruel taskmasters. 1 Kings 5 tells us that Solomon, the first time since that old Pharaoh, he does the same thing. He oppresses his own people and makes them go to work. I mean, he has quotas to meet, right? And he has the power to make other people meet them for him. That's what he does. He abuses his power and he hurts his own people. That's a dark picture. But then even as his greatness increases, we keep seeing these chinks in the armor for Solomon, where in 1 Kings chapter 10, it tells us about all this gold that he racks up, which sounds like a good thing. And it tells us that he imports all of these horses from Egypt, which seems really random, but I promise it's a link to something else in the Bible. He racks up gold, he racks up horses. Not only that, but he racks up wives as well, right? 1 Kings 11 and verse 1, King Solomon loved many foreign women. He loved many women. It's not normally a compliment for someone, especially not in this case. Because remember how we started in 1 Kings chapter 3, saying that Solomon loved the Lord. Well, something changes, because in verse 4 of 1 Kings 11, it says that when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God. So what's he done? He's turned on his own people. He's oppressed them as their Lord for his own ends. He's racked up gold and horses from Egypt specifically, and wives. Now, a few of those might sound random for me to bring up, but I think what the writer of 1 Kings is doing here is very intentional in recalling a passage earlier on in the Bible. This one will be on the screen. Deuteronomy 17, verses 16 through 17. See if you notice any symmetry. This is God's instruction to the kings that were coming for Israel. He said, you want a king, I'll give you a king. But this king is going to be my kind of human. And this is the kind of human that God wanted to be king. He said, only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses. Since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. That's a really, really specific note of what Solomon did, right? He acquired many horses and he made his people go to Egypt to get them. So Solomon checks that box. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away. Well, he checks that box. Nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. Well, you know, in the days of Solomon, they didn't even count silver. It didn't even count for anything. They had so much gold. So put aside excessive silver and just take account the gold. He did that too. And then in verse 20, it says, his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers. Solomon checks all four of those boxes. His heart's lifted up above his brothers. He oppresses his own brothers for his own ends. He racks up gold. He racks up horses. He racks up wives. He is, in many ways, the wisest man who ever lived and a great fool. He covers both ends of that spectrum because we just watched him violate almost every rule that God gave to his kings. Now, how can the wisest man who ever lived also live so foolishly? Turn to Proverbs with me, because I think what might help here is to clarify exactly what wisdom is. Proverbs, obviously written by Solomon. I want to read with you the third verse of Proverbs. Now, Solomon can be a fool. In spite of all of his wisdom, he can live as a fool. Because in the Bible, being wise is more than just knowing enough to get what I want. There's something more to it than that. There's something more to being a wise person than that. Here in Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 3, it says that one of the reasons why this book is in existence is to help us receive instruction in wise dealing. Now there's wisdom, right? In righteousness, justice, and equity. Now, if you're like me, I don't normally equate wisdom with righteousness, justice, and equity. Those three things don't just run in the same circles for me. I tend to think of wisdom as being over here, and these other terms are more ethical terms, right? They have to do with morality, righteousness, and justice, and equity. But for Solomon, those concepts are not separated. The concept of being wise and being good, the concept of being a wise person and being a good person, those two are not separated. In fact, throughout Proverbs, he uses wise and righteous, and he contrasts them with foolish and wicked interchangeably. So, in other words, being wise is the same thing for Solomon as being righteous. And being righteous is the same thing as being wise, or at least you can't be one without the other. You can't be wise without being good, and you can't be good without being wise. So there's no separating the two. Now that means that, so let's say you're in school. Some of you are, and probably all of you were at some point. So let's say you're back in school or you're in school and you have a project or a test coming up. And there's this book in the library that's going to be super helpful for this test. You kind of need it to study. So let's say that you decide to check that book out of the library, even if it means that your classmates are going to suffer because of it. They won't have that book to study for themselves, so their grade's going to go down, but your grade's going to go up, right? So in some ways, some people would say that you were wise in that scenario because you helped boost your grade while also making the grade of your competitors, as it were, go down. But to Solomon, you're actually a fool if you do that. And actually, if you don't check out that book, let's say you maybe read it in the library but then leave it for others to use, and even if it means that your grade goes down a little bit and other grades go up, even if that's the case, you're still wise because you're good. Now, the wisest thing might say, okay, let's work on this collaboratively and study together. And that might be the wisest thing to do. But either way, being good and being wise can't be separated. Now, Solomon messed that up. He tells it to us in Proverbs, but he messed it up in his own life. And that's one reason he was foolish. But another reason he was foolish is because in the Bible, wisdom is more than just an intellectual understanding of what is best to do in a scenario. It's more than just in my mind up here. There's something deeper or more practical going on. It's about know-how. I think that's the best phrase in a way to capture it. Wisdom in the Bible is about know-how. It's about street smarts. If you walk down in downtown Little Rock and you go to the farmer's market that's by the river, I like going there sometimes, and one of the things that you'll find there are some booths that sell some handcrafted woodwork, right? Where people make furniture, people make smaller items, and they're beautiful. They're really impressive that people can do this with wood. But I think that's a good example of what wisdom is in the Bible. Those people who craft that wood to make it so beautiful, they know their material, right? They know its limits, they know its potentials, they know how to take it from a state of chaos, from these random boards, and turn it into something beautiful, something orderly, something pleasing. That's wisdom. Actually, it's used this way in several places in the Bible. For instance, if I remember right, it's when Solomon is building the temple and he's contracting people to help in building the temple. And I think it's Exodus tells us that Exodus 31 tells us that some of the men he contracted were wise. And it's not talking about how smart they were. It's saying they were wise because they were great at their craft. That's what wisdom is in the Bible. It's street smarts. It's know-how, where for us, the craft is life. For us, it's about knowing the limits and potentials of this material that we call our lives. It's about saying, how can I take this from a state of chaos and turn it into something beautiful, something orderly, something pleasing to God, to the people around me, to myself. Someone who knows how to take all of that complexity and live well is wise. Someone who knows how to live the good life is wise. And remember, to be wise and live the good life, you have to be a good person. So the good life is not that I trample on everyone around me and trample on all my business partners and get rich, and then I'll live the good life. That's not the good life. The good life means that I am good, and I am living that good life. So that's wisdom in the Bible. That's how Solomon, I think, would describe wisdom to us. It's about being good while being good at life. There are 3 books in the Bible that have come to be called wisdom literature. Wisdom literature. They're all traced back in some way to Solomon himself, which is why we've talked about him. The 3 books are Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. All 3 of those books, the wisdom literature, they invite humans of all times and places and ages. They invite you and me to sit at the feet of the great wisdom tradition of the nation of Israel and learn how to be good at life. To sit at the feet of Solomon, as it were, and have him instruct us in how we can become wise. But even though the great tradition attributes those 3 books to the same author, or at least they all trace back to Solomon, and even though they're all answering the same basic question, how can one become good at life? How can one become wise? So they come from the same stream, they answer the same basic question, but the 3 each tackle that question with their own unique perspectives. Now for us, obviously to be a fully wise person, we have to incorporate the whole Bible, we have to incorporate life experience, we have to incorporate a lot of things. But just for the sake of tonight, focusing on these 3 books, to be truly wise, we have to listen to each of the 3 and learn what they have to say about wisdom for life's complexities. It's not enough just to listen to one stream and ignore the other 2, or 2 and ignore the other 1. We have to listen to them all in concert with each other. As a thought experiment, I want to ask you with me to imagine that these 3 books are people. So we're going to paint an image of each of the 3 books. Let's start with Proverbs. Proverbs would be a brilliant young teacher. This is just, you're just going to have to go with me here. I'm the one up here talking, so you might imagine it a little bit differently, but this is how I imagine it. Proverbs is a woman, by the way, and you'll know this if you read Proverbs a lot, because wisdom in Proverbs is cast as a woman, Lady Wisdom. And I'll talk about that. I think next time I preach, I want to focus on that. But anyway, she is this young, brilliant teacher. And she's not only just this book smart type of person. She's brilliant in all these different areas of life. She knows about money and integrity and spirituality and sex and relationships. She knows about everything. She's great at all of it. She has incredible insights. She sees things that you would never see on your own. She's just good at life. You can just tell. For me, this isn't what she looks like on the screen, but for me, I think of her as like a woman who's always in a pantsuit and always has her hair up. That's kind of the personality of Proverbs. She just has it going on. She has all of her ducks in a row. She's the perfect friend to have around when you need really specific life advice, because she knows what to do in that situation. She's young, she's idealistic, and she's confident in so many random areas. She knows what's happening. Now, she's confident because she sees this clear cause and effect pattern that's woven into the very fabric of the universe. She sees this pattern that says, if I act like this, then life will go like this. She sees that in the universe itself. She sees that from the very beginning, God has woven this concept that we call wisdom into how the world works. In Proverbs 3, in verse 19, it tells us that the Lord, by wisdom, founded the earth. And in Proverbs 8, it depicts wisdom as almost God's right-hand man in forming the earth, in creation. And it's almost as though God made use of wisdom and simultaneously wove it into every fabric of the universe itself, to where you can't get away from it, because God created everything with it. So there's no getting away from wisdom. Whenever people are making good and just and wise decisions, they're doing what God did in creation. They're being wise. They're tapping into this universal reservoir that God has shared with us, the ability to be wise. Now, whenever someone is making bad decisions, they're working against wisdom. And that means that they're not swimming with the current. They're swimming against it. They're working against the grain of wood. They're doing things wrong. Now, this is a very clear cause and effect pattern for Proverbs. Look in Proverbs chapter 1, if you're there. Read verses 32 and 33 with me. The simple, those are the people who don't know their material. They don't know this block of wood. They don't know what to do with it. The simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster. You see that confidence there? Proverbs sees this pattern. It's like the moral law of the universe, that there's this cause and effect pattern that no one can escape. And you can learn that pattern. You can master that pattern, and you can draw on it to live a good life. I almost feel like I need to say, just call this number and you'll receive it. Because that's what it feels like, right? It's this confident sales pitch that if you live according to this pattern, if you go with the flow of the universe, you will live a good life. That's what Proverbs would tell us. But there's also, in this gathering, Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes has been sitting back and listening to Proverbs, and he's just about had enough. He says, hey, that's too good to be true. Because Proverbs is this middle-aged critic. He's bitter. He's resentful. He's been through the ringer. He's sharp, though. Can't take that away from him. He's the one who treated wisdom as a life hack. If you were tempted to say, oh man, so all I have to do is learn this cause and effect pattern and I'd be good at life. If that was you, that's me. If that was you, then he's here to tell you that it doesn't work like that. If you're in Ecclesiastes, look at chapter 1, verses 12 through 18. Ecclesiastes, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem. Been there, done that. I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. You can't hold on to wind, right? That's what life is. That's what this chase for wisdom is, according to Ecclesiastes. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. What you going to do? Fight against what's going to happen to you in life anyway? I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Oliver Wendell Holmes said, the young man knows the rules, but the old man knows the exceptions. That's not always true, but I think that spirit is very much the Ecclesiastes spirit. The young man knows the rules. Yeah, Proverbs, you know the rules. But the older man, he knows the exceptions. Ecclesiastes is someone you might not want to hang around for very long. He's not very encouraging, after all. But the whole time you're around him, even though he's cynical and he's bitter, he just brings the whole mood down, you can't deny that he has some good points. He gives you perspective that you could have ignored otherwise, and it would have hurt you in life not to have that realistic perspective. If we were imagining Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Job as these three friends who are hanging out, and you come up to them and you ask them for life advice, well, Proverbs would be the first to speak up. Proverbs is going to tell you just how it is. Ecclesiastes is sitting back with this disdainful look on his face. And he's taking it all in, taking this confidence of Proverbs for as long as he can. But then he speaks up with devastating critiques of her wisdom. Get rich? Oh, done that. Get famous? So I've tried that. Become wise? Yep. Happiness? Impossible. Death? Yeah, it's coming. That's what Ecclesiastes is like. He's just this cold, wet, honest blanket. Just kind of dampens the mood of everyone in the group. Job is an older man. And he's just sitting back, and he's just listening to a lot of what's going on around him. He's taking it all in with this weathered face that has a look of understanding. You know, Job has seen a lot in his days, and he's also seen a lot of days. So he has a lot of experience. But you don't get to Job's level of wisdom just by being old. There are a lot of people who are older than Job who have the idealistic confidence of Proverbs. And there are a lot of people who are older than Job who never got over the bitterness of Ecclesiastes. And there are also some young people who have some of the ways of looking at the earth and the world that Job has. So it doesn't necessarily have to do with age, but age a lot of the times helps, and experience does, and it has in Job's case. Now, Job may wait to speak up until you ask him for his input, or maybe he'll find you later and offer you some thoughts away from the crowd. Either way, he's content to sit back here and let the young bucks fight it out, because he used to be like Proverbs. He knew it all. And then life turned him into an Ecclesiastes. But he's worked through that. And so now, he's the one who can sit with you when you've done everything right, according to Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. When you've lived right, and everything still goes wrong. Job is the one who's big enough to turn to with those deep, dark questions. Because he has those eyes that are kind and understanding. And when you look in them, you realize they're big enough to hold even those dark thoughts that I have inside of me. That's Job. And I don't mean to intimate that Job is superior to Proverbs or Ecclesiastes, because that's just not the case. As Ecclesiastes would say, there's a time and a place for all of the three, right? Maybe you're in a Job section of your life where Job is the book that appeals most closely to you. Maybe you're in an Ecclesiastes part of your life, and that's okay. Maybe you've just gone through a lot and you're bitter, and that's kind of how you see the world. It's all vanity. It's all empty. Maybe you're in a Proverbs portion of life and you feel like you just need some really great wisdom that's maybe doesn't deal with all your questions, but is really helpful in life. None of them are superior or inferior to each other. They're all helpful in their own ways. So more than pitting the three against each other, what I want to do is offer you some encouragement. If you happen to be like me and you don't have everything figured out in life, I think these three books can offer us something of an encouragement in that space. Because Proverbs provides this amazing, specific wisdom for so many of life's intricacies. I mean, Proverbs 26:17, I think it is, tells us that if you grab a dog by the ears, whatever happens after that is like what happens when you jump into someone else's fight. Someone else is gossiping about someone else and you want in on it, or when you want in on their drama, that's like grabbing a stray dog by the ears. It's not going to end well for you. That's really weird, really random, but also really true, right? Have you ever jumped into someone else's drama? Man, I mean, you wish a dog was scratching at you because it's like that. Proverbs gives that random, specific, practical advice. Ecclesiastes forces us to recognize that life is complex. We all go through stuff in life. We all chase after stuff that doesn't fulfill us. So sometimes things happen that don't fit into my grid. They don't fit into how I make sense of the world. And that doesn't mean that God isn't real. It doesn't mean he isn't faithful. It doesn't mean he isn't good. It just means that life's more complex than I thought it was. That's where Ecclesiastes meets us. And then Job sits there through it all. He takes it all in, and he's there for us when everything else goes wrong. Now, these three books are one example of many in the Bible of God's building into our scriptures opportunities to wrestle with and question our own faith. You know what the word Israel means? We are today the spiritual Israel. God's people have always been Israel. You know what that word means? It means to wrestle with God. In a lot of ways, that's what life is sometimes. At least if you're in a Job or an Ecclesiastes part of life, you're probably facing that. You think Job wrestled with God? You think Solomon in Ecclesiastes wrestled with God? They did. And these three books give us a way, they give us an excuse, they give us an allowance to wrestle with deep, dark thoughts that most of us are afraid to voice to nice church people, right? They give us a place to come to and sit in the darkness. Because the Bible as a whole gives us this amazing panorama of God doing these awesomely gigantic things in the world. And we know that he's doing them right now, and he's going to keep doing them. There are more on the way, right? We know that. God's doing big things. But we also know that in your life and mine, there are these little events. They're not even a blip on the grand scheme of things. But they sure are big to me. And with those little things that are really big, the wisdom books meet us there, and they refuse to offer simplistic answers to those questions. Even Proverbs refuses to offer simplistic answers to our questions. Instead, they invite us into deeper meditation and relationship with the one who is wisdom himself. You know, there's that old saying, teach a man to fish, and I'm going to butcher it, whatever it is. Teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. Give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. I think about Long John Silver's. So Long John Silver's, this has to be somewhere in the Bible. Long John Silver's is the worst restaurant that man has ever come up with. If you like Long John Silver's, I question your morality. You worry me as a human. So Long John Silver's is disgusting, okay? What would be so mean is if you gave someone Long John Silver's as a gift. That would just be mean because you're trying to poison them. So please don't do that. Don't do it to me as a joke. Some of you, I was looking at some of you who are already planning that. So please don't do that. No, I'm just kidding. If you want to do that, I will throw it away in front of you. So Long John Silver's is terrible. And I think that's almost what it's like to God. This might be a terrible analogy, but just go with me. I think it's almost like what it's like to God when we ask him just to give us a fish instead of teaching us how to fish. Because I think a lot of us, if we were asked about it with no context, we would say, yeah, I just want to be wise. I don't want to have to go on this long journey of becoming wise, of entering into this relationship with wisdom, and I have to learn how to live according to the fabric of the universe, and then when that fabric tears and everything goes wrong, I still have to figure out what to do. Most of us would choose the easy answer. They choose just to have the Long John Silvers. But I think what God is telling us in these books is that we can go for the Long John Silvers, but that disgusting meal is like the fruit in the garden. It promises the knowledge of good and bad. It promises wisdom, but it actually offers death. True life, on the other hand, is not when we look for an exhaustive map that details every single intricate part of our lives and gives us a checklist to achieve on every single day of our lives, and that is what I'm looking for. Instead of that exhaustive map, what true life is accepting the compass that God has given us and chasing after His wisdom. Now, I thought about tacking on to this sermon some kind of neat little bow of application, something that would work for an invitation. But I'm not going to do that because I think it actually fits better with the spirit of the texts that we've been talking about tonight. Because life doesn't always have that neat little bow wrapped around. It doesn't always end the way that you and I want it to. And I think one thing that God is telling us is that we can either get stuck on the life that we wish we had, the life that never was going to happen, or we can charge headfirst. We can accept the sometimes uncomfortable, mostly slow, but always life-giving journey with Him as we navigate life's complexities with His wisdom. So I want to close tonight, and I'll give you an opportunity after this prayer to respond publicly if you need to. But for the purposes of my sermon, I want to close by praying what Paul prays in Ephesians 1, 16 through 19. I pray it for you, and I pray it for me, as Paul prays it for them. He says, I do not cease to give thanks for you, remembering you in my prayers, that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of glory, may give you the spirit of wisdom and of revelation in the knowledge of Him, having the eyes of your hearts enlightened, that you may know what is the hope to which He has called you, what are the riches of His glorious inheritance in the saints, and what is the immeasurable greatness of His power toward us who believe, according to the working of His great might. Amen. If you need to make something right publicly tonight, won't you please do that with all of your closest spiritual relatives?